Right, so get this. We're diving deep today into some research that's combining AI and healthcare.
Yeah, it's really fascinating stuff.
It can have a big impact, especially in Africa.
Absolutely. It's all about this project called AfriMed-QA.
AfriMed-QA.
Yeah, the dataset.
Okay.
And it's designed to test how well these large language models, the LLMs we're always hearing about,
Right.
to see how well they can handle medical questions, but specifically ones that are specific to Africa.
So it's not just can AI, pass a medical exam.
Right.
It's can it actually work in the complexities of healthcare in a different context.
Exactly. Most of the LLMs we have are trained on Western medical data.
Yeah.
So they might be great at diagnosing, conditions that are common in the US or Europe. But when you start talking about diseases that are, maybe more prevalent in Africa or cultural factors that might influence healthcare, they haven't had that kind of training.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's like expecting someone who's only ever read medical textbooks to be able to suddenly work in a clinic in rural Kenya.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
So tell me more about this AfriMed-QA dataset. How do they put it together?
Well, they basically tapped into this huge network of medical experts all across Africa.
Wow.
We're talking 32 different specialties, over 600 contributors from 16 different countries.
Right.
And they've compiled over 15,000 medical questions.
15,000?
Yeah, covering all sorts of topics, from common illnesses to, complex surgical procedures.
Wow. Okay, that's a serious test.
Oh, yeah.
And they didn't just stick to multiple choice questions, did they?
No, they didn't. They went beyond that.
Okay.
They included open-ended questions, the kind where the AI has to actually provide a detailed explanation, or, even those everyday kind of questions that someone might ask their doctor or, search online.
So it's really assessing, can they communicate about health in a way that's relatable for everyday people?
Exactly. And to make things even more interesting, they tested 30 different LLMs on this data set.
Wow.
Everything from, the big ones like GPT-4
Right.
to some smaller, more open source ones that, maybe could run on less powerful devices.
So they're really looking at both the AI's ability to understand the medical information,
Right.
but then also communicate it.
You got it.
Interesting.
It's kind of like the brains in the bedside manner.
Yeah, like the whole package.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's get to the results. How did the AI doctors perform?
Well, the findings are pretty interesting.
Okay.
Some of the top performing LLMs, especially the bigger ones, they actually scored over 75% accuracy on these multiple choice questions.
That's pretty impressive.
It is.
So does that mean we can just start deploying these AI doctors across Africa?
Well, not so fast.
Okay.
There's a catch.
Okay.
While the LLMs did well overall, they tended to struggle with questions that were very specific to the African context.
So meaning they were better at answering questions about maybe heart disease in general, but not so good at maybe diagnosing a condition that's more common in a certain region of Africa.
Exactly. Remember, their training is based mostly on that Western medical data.
Right.
So when you start throwing in questions about diseases that are more prevalent in Africa or, cultural factors that might influence healthcare decisions, they just haven't had that kind of exposure.
So even though they aced the medical exam,
Yeah.
they haven't quite mastered the local, dialect.
That's a perfect way to put it.
That's interesting.
And that's really one of the key takeaways from this research is that if we want to use AI effectively in healthcare, we need to make sure it's trained on data that's relevant to those specific populations it's going to serve.
So it's not just about having smart AI. It's about having AI that's culturally aware
Exactly.
and sensitive to the needs of different communities.
Right.
This is all incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's more to unpack here.
Yeah.
For example, you mentioned that some LLMs are bigger and more complex than others.
Right.
How did that affect their performance?
Well, that's a great question, and it leads us into this whole debate about size versus practicality.
Okay, so is bigger always better in the AI world?
Well, when it comes to AI, size often does translate to power. Those larger models, the ones with billions of parameters, they have this vast knowledge base.
It's like comparing a small community library to the Library of Congress, right?
Exactly. And as you can imagine, that extra knowledge, it can be a big advantage when it comes to answering those complex medical questions.
But I imagine there's got to be some kind of trade-off there. I mean, the Library of Congress might have every book imaginable, but good luck finding what you need without, a whole team of librarians and a supercomputer.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. Those massive LLMs, they require a lot of computing power to run, and that can be a real challenge, especially in those resource-limited settings.
So it's not just about can the AI answer the questions, it's about can we actually deploy it in the places where it's needed most.
Exactly, and that's why researchers are also looking at those smaller, more streamlined LLMs, the ones that
Okay.
can maybe run on a smartphone or a simple laptop.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah.
So it's like this balancing act. You want the AI to be powerful enough to handle those complex medical questions, but also lightweight enough to be accessible, in rural clinics or remote communities.
Right. And the research on AfriMed-QA, that's what's really helping us understand that trade-off better, to see where those smaller models excel and where they might need some extra help.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm also curious about something else you mentioned earlier, how the AI's answers were actually preferred by some people over the responses from real doctors.
Yeah, that was one of the really surprising findings.
Really?
It turns out that in some cases, people actually found the AI's explanations to be more thorough and comprehensive.
I could see that. I mean, sometimes, doctors with all their training and experience, they might, assume a certain level of knowledge and their explanations might be a bit more concise, a bit more to the point.
Yeah. Right, exactly. But for someone who's not a medical expert, that concise explanation, it might leave them feeling like they're missing something.
Whereas the AI might sort of walk you through each step,
Mm-hmm.
explore different possibilities and really break things down in a way that's easier for someone to grasp.
Exactly. And I think this really points to a potential role for AI in healthcare that goes beyond just, diagnosis or treatment recommendations.
Yeah.
Could also be a really powerful tool for patient education for empowerment.
So it's almost like having a virtual AI medical companion
Yeah.
that can answer all your questions and explain things in a way that you really understand.
That's a great way to think about it. And this could be, especially beneficial in those areas where access to healthcare professionals is really limited.
Right. Yeah. I see how this all fits together now.
Yeah.
So we're not just talking about replacing doctors and hospitals. We're talking about extending the reach of healthcare. Those communities that maybe haven't always had the best access.
Right. And I think that's where the real power of AI lies, in its ability to amplify those efforts to create a more equitable and just healthcare system.
So it's about using technology to empower individuals and communities, to give them the tools they need to take control of their own health.
Absolutely. And the research on AfriMed-QA, that's what's helping us lay the groundwork for that future. By understanding the strengths and the limitations of these AI systems, we can start to develop them and deploy them in a way that's both effective and ethical.
Right. We want to make sure it's done responsibly.
Yeah.
Okay. This has been so insightful, this whole discussion.
Yeah.
But I want to make sure we're not, getting ahead of ourselves. We've talked a lot about the potential benefits of AI in healthcare. But what about the potential risks?
Yeah, that's a really important point. And it's definitely something that the researchers behind AfriMed-QA were very careful to consider.
What are some of the risks that we should be thinking about?
Well, one concern is, the potential for AI to make mistakes.
Yeah.
No AI is perfect. And these LLMs, they're still under development. They can sometimes misinterpret information, make incorrect inferences, or even hallucinate. Yeah, meaning they basically come up with information that's not based in reality.
So like those moments when you ask a chatbot a question and it gives you a response that's totally off the wall.
Exactly. And you can imagine in the context of healthcare, those kinds of errors could have serious consequences.
Yeah, I mean, a misdiagnosis or, an inappropriate treatment recommendation could be really harmful.
That's right. And that's why it's so important that any AI system that's going to be used in healthcare, it needs to undergo rigorous testing and validation before it's ever used with real patients.
Right. And it's also important to remember that this should be a tool to support healthcare professionals, not replace them.
Absolutely. Human oversight is crucial. Doctors and nurses, they need to be involved in that decision-making process, using their expertise and judgment to evaluate, what the AI is recommending and making sure that, those patients are getting the best possible care.
So it's about finding that right balance. Using AI to sort of enhance those human capabilities and improve healthcare delivery, but always, prioritizing patient safety and well-being.
Exactly. It's about collaboration, not replacement.
Okay. This has been such an eye-opening conversation. We've explored the promise of AI in healthcare and also the need for caution for, responsible development and implementation.
It's a complex landscape, but it's one that's full of possibilities.
Speaking of possibilities, I'm curious what excites you most about the potential of AI in healthcare, especially in Africa.
For me, it's the potential to really democratize access to quality healthcare.
That's a big one. How do you see AI, fitting into all of that?
Well, imagine a world where it doesn't matter where you live, you have access to, reliable medical information and guidance.
So even in those really remote villages where a doctor might be hours away.
Yeah. Exactly. AI could really help to bridge that gap. Think about it. AI-powered chatbots that can answer basic questions, maybe give some first aid advice, or even help people manage chronic conditions.
So it's like having this virtual health assistant right there in your pocket.
That's the idea. And with, how much mobile technology and internet connectivity is growing in Africa, it's becoming more and more possible.
Yeah, so we're not just talking about replacing doctors and hospitals. It's about bringing healthcare to those communities that haven't always had, easy access.
Right, and I think that's really where the power of AI lies. It can help us build a more equitable healthcare system.
It's about giving people the tools and the information to take control of their own health.
Absolutely. And the research on AfriMed-QA, that's what it's doing, laying the groundwork for that future. By really understanding what these AI systems can and can't do, we can start to use them in a way that's both effective and ethical.
Which brings us back to that idea of responsible implementation, right?
Right. We need to be careful and make sure that AI is used to benefit everyone and not, make existing disparities worse.
So it's not just about the technology itself, but how it's used, who has access to it, and making sure it's fair for everybody.
I completely agree. It takes all of us working together, researchers, policymakers, healthcare workers, and communities to get this right.
It's a big challenge, but the potential is huge.
Definitely. Imagine a future where everyone in Africa, regardless of where they live or their background, has access to the healthcare they need.
That's a powerful vision. And this deep dive into AfriMed-QA has given us a lot to think about. Shown us what AI can do, but it's also reminded us to be thoughtful, ethical, and always focused on equity as we move forward.
Yeah, technology is a powerful tool, but it's up to us to use it wisely.
Well, it's been great exploring this research with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We've covered so much, from the technical parts of these LLMs to the ethical questions about AI in healthcare.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's still so much more to learn and explore as AI keeps changing the world.
We've learned how AI can really improve healthcare in Africa.
Yeah.
But we also talked about the need for localization, that balance between how powerful the AI is and how practical it is to use, and of course how important it is to implement it responsibly.
Right. We've got to keep this conversation going and see where this all leads.
That's right. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of AI and healthcare in Africa. And until next time, stay curious,
Yeah.
stay informed, and keep asking those big questions.